The sun was sinking low over the dusty frontier town, staining the sky the color of dried blood and old regrets. In the American Wild West of the late 1800s, people said justice lived in courthouses and churches, but on most days it lived in whispers, glances, and cruel bargains made behind closed doors. That evening, a small crowd gathered near the trading post, drawn not by celebration, but by curiosity. At the center stood an Apache woman, her hands bound loosely, her posture straight, despite the humiliation pressing down on her. She did not beg. She did not cry. Her silence unsettled everyone who looked at her. They called her infertile, useless, a burden even her own tribe had chosen to sell. Watching from a short distance was John Hawkins, a widowed rancher who had learned the hard way that getting involved usually came at a terrible cost. He had 6 children waiting for him at home, mouths to feed, and grief he barely kept buried. He had promised himself never to invite trouble again. And yet as the Maamala was struck and the woman's fate sealed, John felt something shift, because sometimes a single quiet decision can change far more than one life, and leave consequences no one is ready to face. Before we begin the story, take a moment to comment below with your location and the local time you're listening from. I'd love to know where you're joining us from. And if you enjoy powerful, emotional Wild West stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what happens next. John Hawkins did not speak another word as the deal was finalized. He handed over the coins with a steady hand, though his chest felt tight, as if he had stepped on a ground that might give way beneath him at any moment. Silas Crowley smiled thinly, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes, and tucked the money into his coat, as though this exchange were no different from selling grain or cattle. "She's yours now," Crowley said lightly. "Doesn't talk much, won't give you airs, but she works." The Apache woman did not look at Crowley. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the dying sun met the endless land. John noticed the faint tension in her shoulders when Crowley stepped closer, the way her fingers curled inward, as if remembering restraints that had cut deeper than rope. John cleared his throat. "She comes with me," he said. "No chains." Crowley lifted his hands in mock surrender. "As you wish, Hawkins. She won't run far." John did not answer. He turned toward his horse and motioned for the woman to follow. After a brief hesitation, she did. They rode out of town without ceremony. Dust rose behind them, swallowing the voices and stares they left behind. The woman sat stiffly on the second horse John had brought her, balance sure, her eyes always moving. She did not ask where they were going. She did not thank him, and somehow that unsettled him more than if she had. The land stretched wide and empty as they traveled. Wind combed through dry grass, carrying the distant cry of a hawk. John felt the weight of the woman's presence beside him, silent, watchful, wounded in ways he could not yet name. "You'll have a place to sleep," he said finally, his voice low. "Food. Work if you want it. You don't owe me anything else." She turned her head slightly enough for him to see her profile. There was no fear in her eyes, only caution. After a moment, she gave a small nod. That was all. By the time the ranch came into view, the sky had darkened into deep violet. A modest house stood against the open plain, weathered but sturdy. Beyond it, fences enclosed grazing land, and a worn barn leaned into the wind like an old companion. Lights flickered in the windows. The children saw him first. Papa Tommy's small voice carried across the yard as the front door burst open. The youngest came running barefoot, followed closely by Maggie, then Joey, Hattie, Sam, and finally Clara, who stopped short when she saw the second horse. John dismounted slowly. "Easy," he said. "All of you." 6 pairs of eyes fixed on the woman as she slid down from the saddle. Dust clung to her skirts. Her hair hung dark and loose down her back. She stood very still, hands folded before her as though bracing for judgment. "Who's that?" Joey blurted. Sam's jaw tightened. "Why did you bring her here?" Clara said nothing. Her gaze moved over the woman, carefully measuring, protecting. John rubbed the back of his neck. "This is Naya," he said, choosing the name he had heard whispered once at the trading post. "She'll be staying with us for a while." "With us," Sam snapped. "Papa." "That's enough." John's voice was firm but not unkind. "She's not here to replace anyone. She's here because she needs a place." Naya did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. She lowered her eyes, stepping back slightly, as Maggie edged closer, curiosity outweighing caution. "She's pretty," Maggie whispered. Naya glanced down at the child, startled. Maggie smiled at her without hesitation. For the briefest moment, something softened in Naya's expression before it vanished again. That night, supper passed in uneasy silence. Naya sat at the far end of the table, barely touching her food until John nodded gently. Then she ate with careful gratitude, savoring each bite as though it might be taken away. Tommy stared at her openly. "Does she talk?" John hesitated. "Not much." Naya looked up, meeting Tommy's gaze. Slowly, she shook her head. After the children were sent to bed, John showed Naya a small room near the back of the house. Clean, simple, safe. "You can rest," he said. "We'll talk more tomorrow." She studied the room, then him. Finally, she placed a hand over her heart and bowed her head slightly. It wasn't thanks. It was acknowledgement. The house settled into quiet. Wind rattled the windows. John sat alone at the kitchen table long after the lamp burned low, doubt gnawing at him. He had invited danger into his home. He knew that. Crowley would not let this go. Neither would the town. A sharp cry shattered the stillness. Papa John was on his feet instantly, heart pounding. He rushed down the hall to find Tommy thrashing in his bed, tears streaking his small face. "Bad dream," the boy sobbed. "They were taking you away." John gathered him close. "I'm here. You're safe." From the doorway, a shadow moved. Naya stood there barefoot, her eyes alert. She knelt beside the bed without a word, gently placing her hand near Tommy's chest. Not touching at first, just close enough for him to feel her presence. She hummed softly, a low, unfamiliar sound, steady and calming. Tommy's breathing slowed. John watched something tightening in his throat. The woman everyone had called useless soothed his child without a single word. When Tommy fell asleep again, Naya rose quietly. At the door, she paused and looked back at John. In her eyes was no plea, no demand, only a silent promise she would protect what had been placed near her, no matter the cost. John realized then that bringing her home had not ended anything. It had only begun. Morning came slowly to the Hawkins ranch, carried on a pale wind that brushed the grass and rattled the fence posts like quiet warnings. John was already awake when the sun crested the horizon. Sleep had been thin and restless, weighed down by thoughts he could not still, of the woman sleeping under his roof, of Crowley's smile, of the town that never forgot a perceived offense. He found Naya outside. She stood near the corral, her bare hands resting lightly on the fence rail as she watched the horses move. The light caught the dark strands of her hair, turning them almost blue. She did not notice him at first. Her attention was complete, reverent, as though she were listening to something beyond sound. John cleared his throat softly. Naya turned at once, eyes alert. There was no surprise in her face, only readiness. "You don't have to start work yet," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the barn. "We'll go slow." She considered his words, then nodded once. Instead of returning to the house, she walked toward the far pasture where a fence sagged low, the wire twisted from a recent storm. John frowned. He had meant to fix that. Before he could stop her, Naya knelt and examined the break. She tugged once, testing the tension, then glanced toward the barn. John followed her gaze. "You want tools?" he asked. She gave him a brief, approving look, as if pleased he had understood, and waited. By the time the children stumbled outside for breakfast, the fence was repaired. Not beautifully, not perfectly, but strong. Sam noticed first. She fixed that he said disbelief sharp in his voice. John nodded. "Looks like it." Sam scowled, suspicion deepening. Clara watched quietly, arms folded, saying nothing. Inside the house, Naya moved with careful restraint. She washed her hands before touching anything. She stepped aside when the children passed, as if afraid of taking up space. But she noticed everything: the empty cup near Hattie, the loose button on Joey's shirt, the way Maggie favored her left foot. When Maggie tripped and scraped her knee, Naya was there instantly. She cleaned the wound with water and a strip torn from her own sleeve, tying it with practiced ease. Maggie did not cry. "Doesn't even hurt," she announced proudly. Naya smiled then. A small thing, fleeting. But John saw it. Words were scarce between them, but meaning flowed anyway. Naya learned the rhythm of the ranch by watching. She rose with the sun. She moved when work was needed and stayed still when it wasn't. She never entered John's room, never sat in the chair that had once belonged to his wife. Hattie noticed that too. That afternoon, Hattie found Naya by the creek, rinsing clothes against smooth stones. The girl lingered nearby, uncertain. "My name is Hattie," she said, finally pointing to herself. "Harriet, but everyone calls me Hattie." Naya looked up. After a moment, she pressed a hand to her chest. "Naya," she said softly, the word careful on her tongue. Hattie smiled. "I like that." They sat in companionable silence, the water speaking for them. Hattie watched Naya's hands, strong, steady, scarred, hands that had known work and restraint both. "You don't have to be afraid here," Hattie said suddenly. Naya's hands paused. She looked at Hattie for a long moment, then shook her head, not in disagreement, but in something like sorrow. Fear, it seemed, did not leave so easily. That evening, John found a small bundle tucked neatly beside the wash basin in Naya's room. He hadn't meant to pry. The door had been ajar, the lamp unlit, but the bundle caught his eye because it was wrapped with care. Inside lay a simple leather cord and a small carved token smoothed by years of handling. It was not decorative, it was not valuable, but it mattered. John closed the bundle and stepped back. Whatever it was not his to touch. At supper, Sam pushed his plate away. "I don't like her being here." Naya stiffened. She kept her eyes down. John's voice was even. "You don't have to like it. You do have to be decent." Sam shot to his feet. "She's trouble. Everyone knows it." "Crowley." "That's enough," John said, sharper now. "You'll sit." Sam hesitated, then obeyed, but his glare lingered. Later that night, John heard raised voices near the barn. He grabbed his coat and stepped outside to find Sam standing, rigid fists clenched, Naya a few feet away. "She tried to tell me what to do," Sam said angrily. "She doesn't belong here." Naya raised her hands slowly, palms open. She pointed to the loose latch on the barn door, then to the dark sky. A storm was coming. Her meaning was clear. John looked at Sam. She was trying to help. Sam's face flushed. He stormed past them, muttering. Naya's shoulders sagged once Sam was gone. John hesitated, then spoke gently. "He's hurting. We all are." She met his gaze, something raw flickering there. Then she reached out, not to him, but to the barn door, securing it against the wind. That night, the storm hit hard. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder rolled like distant cannon fire. Tommy screamed again. John was halfway down the hall when he saw Naya already there, kneeling by the boy's bed. She did not touch him this time. She only stayed steady as the storm raged. When Tommy calmed, John whispered, "Thank you." Naya looked at him, her expression unreadable. Slowly she shook her head. She pointed to Tommy, then to herself, then placed her hand over her heart. Understanding dawned slowly. She was not thanking him for being there. She was claiming her place. Later, as the storm eased, John stood alone on the porch. The ranch was quiet again, but something had changed. The woman the world had cast aside was weaving herself into his home, not with demands or pleas, but with presence. And, for the first time since his wife's death, John felt the faint, unsettling sense that his carefully guarded solitude was being undone not by force, but by a silence that spoke louder than any promise. The road into town had never felt so long. John Hawkins rode at a measured pace, the wagon creaking behind him as it carried eggs, cured meat, and a small bundle of hides for trade. Naya sat beside him on the bench, hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed ahead. She wore a plain dress Clara had reluctantly given up, too big at the shoulders, too tight at the sleeves, but Naya had altered it, neatly stitching, careful and strong. John noticed the way townspeople turned as they entered the main street. Conversations paused, doors half closed, eyes followed them with open curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. Naya felt it too. Her posture tightened, shoulders squared, as though preparing for an unseen blow. At the mercantile, John helped unload the goods, while Naya stood back close to the wagon. A few men lingered nearby, whispering. One spat into the dust and laughed under his breath. "Apache," someone muttered. "Thought Crowley sold her." He did. Another replied. "Guess Hawkins likes collecting strays." John kept his head down. He had learned long ago that confronting every insult only fed the fire, but his jaw clenched, and Naya saw it. Inside the store, Mrs. Lillian Pruitt greeted them with a practiced smile that never warmed her eyes. "Well," she said, folding her gloved hands, "isn't this unexpected?" John inclined his head. "Morning, Mrs. Pruitt." Her gaze slid to Naya. "I hear she's unfortunate." Naya understood the tone, if not the words. She lowered her eyes. Mrs. Pruitt leaned closer to John. "A woman who cannot bear children often brings misfortune with her. It's in Scripture." John straightened. "So is kindness." The smile faltered, only briefly. As they stepped back outside, Sheriff Walter Harlan stood in the street, thumbs hooked in his belt. He nodded to John, then looked Naya over like a ledger entry. "You got papers for her?" he asked. John met his gaze evenly. "She's not property." Harlan shrugged. "Crowley says otherwise." Naya shifted, then lifting her chin. For a heartbeat, her eyes locked with the sheriff's. There was no fear there, only something that made Harlan look away first. "Just be careful," he muttered. "Town doesn't like surprises." They had nearly finished their business when it happened. A sharp pain bloomed at Naya's shoulder as a stone struck her. She staggered, caught herself, and turned just in time to see a boy no older than Sam lower his arm, face twisted in hatred. "Go back where you came from!" he shouted. Before John could move, Maggie, who had insisted on coming along, ran forward. Another stone flew. Naya moved without thinking. She stepped in front of Maggie, wrapping an arm around the child as the stone struck her own back with a dull thud. She did not cry out. She only tightened her hold. The street went quiet. John felt something inside him snap. "Enough!" he roared, his voice echoing off the buildings. The boy's mother grabbed his arm, pulling him back, but her eyes burned with resentment rather than shame. Naya knelt, checking Maggie carefully. When she was satisfied the child was unharmed, she rested her forehead briefly against Maggie's hair. "I'm okay," Maggie whispered. "She saved me." Someone laughed nervously. Another cleared his throat. Mrs. Pruitt stepped forward, voice honeyed. "There's no need for scenes." John rounded on her. "A child was attacked." "It was just a stone," she replied coolly. Naya rose slowly. She brushed dust from her skirt, then looked at the gathered faces. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were dark, reflecting something the town did not want to see. Sheriff Harlan shifted uncomfortably. "Let's all settle down." As they left town, the silence between John and Naya felt heavier than before. Not awkward, weighted. At the edge of the road, Naya paused. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small scrap of cloth she had kept hidden. Carefully, she pressed it into Maggie's hand. Maggie smiled, clutching it like a treasure. "What's that?" John asked gently once they were alone. Naya hesitated. Then she touched her own shoulder where the stone had struck, shook her head, and pointed to Maggie. Understanding settled in John's chest. Pain meant nothing to her compared to protecting a child. That night, the ranch felt different. Clara watched Naya more closely now, her suspicion cracking. Hattie sat beside Naya at supper, mimicking her careful movements. Sam remained distant, but his anger had dulled into something uncertain. After the children were asleep, John stood on the porch, staring out at the darkened fields. He sensed movement near the fence and stiffened, but it was only Maeve Carter, lantern in hand. "I heard about town," she said quietly. "People talk." John nodded. "They always do." Maeve studied the house. "That woman, she's stronger than she looks." John followed her gaze. Inside through the window, Naya sat at the table mending a tear in Tommy's shirt with meticulous care. "She is," he agreed. Maeve's voice softened. "Be careful, John. Folks don't forgive easily when their cruelty is shown back to them." As Maeve walked away, John felt the truth of her words settle like a warning bell. Inside, Naya finished her sewing and looked up as John entered. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she reached out, touching her shoulder where the stone had struck earlier. Slowly, deliberately, she shook her head. "It does not matter." She placed her hand over her heart, then gestured toward the children's rooms. "They matter." John swallowed hard. The town had made its judgment clear. It was watching, waiting, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him that today's cruelty was only the beginning. The night after the incident in town settled heavily over the Hawkins ranch as if the land itself were holding its breath. The wind died down, leaving an unnatural stillness that made even the creak of the floorboards sound loud. John Hawkins sat alone at the kitchen table long after the lamp had burned low, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, gone cold. Across the room stood a closed door. It had remained shut for years. Behind it lay the remnants of a life he rarely allowed himself to remember, the room that once belonged to his wife. Her absence was a presence of its own, lingering in the corners, in the silence, in the way the children avoided the space without ever being told to. John rose slowly and stood before the door, his fingers brushing the worn wood. He had not opened it since the winter she died, when grief had settled into the house like a permanent guest. He had learned to live around it, not through it. A soft sound behind him made him turn. Naya stood in the doorway to the hall, holding a folded blanket. She froze when she saw him there, uncertainty flickering across her face. John exhaled. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly. "I just needed a moment." Naya studied him, then the door. Understanding passed between them without words. Slowly she nodded and stepped back, retreating down the hall. But the door remained. Later that night, Clara lay awake in her bed staring at the ceiling. She had watched the way Naya shielded Maggie in town, the way she absorbed pain without complaint. It unsettled her. It threatened the careful balance Clara had built to protect her siblings since their mother's death. When she finally rose, it was with purpose. Clara found Naya in the small back room, folding laundry with quiet precision. The girl crossed her arms, bracing herself. "You shouldn't be here," Clara said. Naya looked up calmly. "This is our house," Clara continued, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. "My mother's house." Naya's hands stilled. She lowered her gaze, then stood. Carefully, respectfully, she stepped back, pressing her hand to her heart before gesturing toward the doorway. "I understand." The gesture only made Clara angrier. "You don't," she snapped. "You don't know what we lost." Naya met her eyes then. Slowly, she reached up and traced a line down her own cheek, not mimicking tears, but acknowledging grief. Then she pointed to the closed door down the hall. Clara's breath caught. "You don't go in there," she warned. Naya shook her head once. No, she hadn't. The next morning, John awoke to an unfamiliar sound. Quiet movement, careful and deliberate. He followed it down the hall and stopped short. The door was open. Inside, sunlight spilled across the room, illuminating furniture long untouched. The bed was made. Dust wiped away. Fresh air flowed through an open window. Naya stood in the center of the room, hands empty, eyes lowered. She had not moved anything that mattered. She had only cleaned. Honored. John felt something in his chest give way. "This was her room," he said softly. Naya nodded. "She was kind." He added the word, feeling too small. Stronger than anyone knew. Naya reached into her pocket and drew out the small carved token John had glimpsed days earlier. She placed it gently on the dresser beside a faded photograph of John's wife. "Respect," the gesture said, "not replacement." Clara stood frozen in the doorway watching. Her anger faltered, giving way to something aching and confused. That afternoon, clouds gathered low and heavy. Sam returned from the fields early, face tight with worry. "There's talk in town," he said to John. "People saying you're hiding something, saying she brought trouble." John nodded. "I figured." And Crowley, Sam pressed. "He'll come," John replied. Men like him always do. As if summoned by the words, a rider appeared on the distant road just before dusk. Silas Crowley arrived without invitation. His horse lathered his hat, tipped just enough to appear polite. He smiled as John stepped out to meet him. "You've caused quite a stir," Crowley said lightly. "Town doesn't care for surprises." "She's not for sale," John said flatly. Crowley chuckled. "Never said she was. But ownership has a way of being flexible." Naya watched from the porch, her face unreadable. Crowley's eyes flicked to her lingering. "She's not what you think, Hawkins." John stepped closer. "Leave." Crowley's smile hardened. "You think bringing her here makes you noble. But when the town turns, and it will, you'll find yourself very alone." He mounted his horse and rode off, dust rising behind him like a promise. That night, the children gathered close together in the living room, sensing the tension even if they did not fully understand it. Naya moved among them, quietly handing out blankets, smoothing hair, grounding them with her presence. Tommy tugged at her sleeve. "You staying?" he asked in a whisper. Naya knelt to his level. She placed her hand over her heart, then gently over his. "Yes." The gesture said, "If they'll have me." John watched from the doorway, the weight of choice pressing down on him. He had tried to keep his family safe by keeping the world at a distance, but the world had found them anyway. Later, when the house was quiet, John stood outside beneath a sky crowded with stars. Naya joined him, the night air stirring her hair. "They'll come again," he said. She nodded. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been circling him since the day they met. "Why did they sell you?" Naya looked out across the land, her expression unreadable. Slowly, she touched her abdomen, then shook her head. "A lie." She pointed toward the horizon, toward everything that had been taken from her. John felt a chill run through him. Whatever the truth was, it was dangerous enough to make a tribe turn on one of its own. The past was no longer buried. It had walked into his home quiet and wounded, and the town would not rest until it reclaimed its sense of power. John clenched his fists at his sides. He had lost one woman to fate and cruelty already. He would not lose another without a fight. The morning broke harsh and bright, the kind of day that left nowhere to hide. John Hawkins rose before the sun, the weight of the night's conversation pressing against his ribs. He moved through the house quietly, mindful of sleeping children, and stepped outside to breathe in the cool air. The ranch lay still as if waiting. Naya was already awake. She knelt by the garden patch behind the house, pressing seeds into the soil with careful patience. Her hands moved with purpose, neither rushed nor hesitant, as though she trusted the earth to answer if she treated it right. John watched for a moment before speaking, struck by how naturally she belonged to the land, how the land seemed to accept her. "There's talk in town," he said finally. She looked up, reading the tension in his voice. Her eyes sharpened. "He won't stop," John added. "Crowley." Naya's jaw tightened. She nodded once. She had known this before he said it. Some dangers did not need names. The children spilled out soon after, yawning and hungry. Sam lingered near the fence, restless, his gaze fixed on the road, as if expecting something to appear. Clara noticed and frowned. "What is it?" she asked. Sam shook his head. "Nothing." But Naya noticed too. She always did. By midday, the heat had settled thick and unmoving. John was repairing a broken hinge on the barn door when the sound of hooves cut through the quiet. He straightened slowly, dread coiling in his gut. Silas Crowley rode in alone. This time his horse calm, his posture relaxed. He dismounted without hurry, dusting his coat as if he were a guest arriving for tea, rather than a man who sold lives for profit. "Hawkins," he called pleasantly. "Thought I'd pay a visit." John stepped forward, positioning himself between Crowley and the house. "You've said enough." Crowley smiled. "I've barely begun." Naya appeared at the edge of the yard, her presence silent, but unmistakable. Crowley's gaze slid to her, lingering. "You see," Crowley continued, "this arrangement of yours, it complicates things. Folks are asking questions, dangerous ones." "She's not yours," John said. Crowley chuckled softly. "Ownership is a funny thing. Sometimes it's written, sometimes it's assumed, and sometimes it's enforced." John's hands curled into fists. "You step 1 foot closer." Crowley raised a hand. "Easy. I'm not here to make threats." His eyes flicked briefly toward the house. "At least not obvious ones." Naya's shoulders stiffened. She moved closer to John, not hiding behind him, but standing beside him, equal and unbowed. Crowley's smile thinned. "She won't tell you the truth," he said, voice low. "Because if she did, you'd send her away yourself." John met his gaze. "You don't know me." Crowley leaned in just enough for his words to land like poison. "I know men. I know fear. And I know secrets that rot from the inside." He stepped back, mounting his horse. "Think carefully, Hawkins. Towns have a way of correcting mistakes." As he rode off, Naya's breath came shallow, controlled. John turned to her. "He's bluffing." But she shook her head. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and touched John's forearm, not in comfort, but in warning. That afternoon, Sam disappeared. It was Clara who noticed first. He was supposed to help with the fence, she said, eyes scanning the fields. John called his name, his voice carrying across the land. No answer. Naya's gaze went immediately to the old trail that led toward the creek, and beyond to the edge of the ranch where the land dipped low and the trees thickened. Without a word, she started walking. John followed. They found Sam near the tree line, pacing, a rifle clutched awkwardly in his hands, his face flushed with anger and fear. "What are you doing?" John demanded. Sam spun around. "I heard what Crowley said. He's not going to stop. Someone has to." Naya stepped forward slowly, her hands raised, palms open. She shook her head firmly. "She doesn't understand," Sam snapped. But she did. Naya pointed to the rifle, then to Sam's chest, then made a slicing motion across her own throat. "This will end badly," the gesture said. "For you." Sam hesitated, conflict tearing across his face. "He's going to hurt us." Naya's eyes softened. She placed a hand over her heart, then pointed back toward the house. "We protect by staying together." John stepped closer. "She's right, son." Sam's grip loosened. Slowly, he lowered the rifle. His shoulders sagged as the weight of his fear finally broke through. "I just wanted to help," he whispered. Naya reached out, then resting her hand briefly on his arm. The contact was light, respectful. Sam flinched, then stilled. That night, a storm rolled in without warning. Wind tore across the plains, rattling shutters and bending trees. John moved quickly, securing doors and windows, checking on the animals. The children huddled together inside, their fear rising with each crack of thunder. Then came the sound that froze John's blood. The barn door slammed open. He grabbed his lantern and ran, rain pelting his face. The door hung loose, the latch broken. Footprints marred the mud, fresh, deliberate. Someone had been there. Naya appeared beside him, lantern light, catching the tension in her face. She crouched, examining the ground, fingers tracing the prints with certainty. She looked up at John and shook her head slowly. This was no accident. As the storm raged on, Naya reached into her pocket and pulled out the carved token once more. She pressed it into John's hand, this time her gaze steady. It was not a plea. It was a warning. John closed his fingers around it, understanding dawning with a chill. Crowley's visit had not been talk. It had been a promise. And now the land itself seemed to whisper the same truth. Whatever secret Naya carried had already begun to draw bloodless lines in the dirt lines that would soon demand a reckoning. The storm did not pass quickly. It lingered over the Hawkins ranch like a living thing, breathing through the land in long, restless gusts. Rain hammered the roof and soaked the earth until every step outside threatened to sink a boot ankle-deep into mud. Thunder rolled in slow intervals, less violent now, but heavier like a warning that had not yet been fully spoken. John barred the barn door as best he could, reinforcing the broken latch with rope and timber. His hands worked on instinct mind, racing ahead to every dark possibility Crowley's visit had planted. Inside the house, the children huddled together near the hearth. Clara had taken charge without being asked, counting heads, pulling blankets, close, her jaw set with determination that mirrored her father's. "Everyone stay where I can see you," she said quietly. Naya moved among them like a shadow that meant safety rather than fear. She knelt beside Tommy, who trembled despite the warmth of the fire, and placed a steady hand against his back. Her presence slowed his breathing. She did not hush him. She did not tell him to be brave. She simply stayed. A sudden crash of thunder made Joey gasp. Maggie clutched Naya's sleeve. "It's all right," Hattie whispered, surprising herself with how calm her own voice sounded. Another sound cut through the storm. Not thunder. Footsteps. John heard them first, a faint, deliberate crunch in the mud near the side of the house. He stiffened hand, moving instinctively toward the rifle resting by the door. The storm masked most sounds, but not intent. Whoever was out there knew how to move quietly. Naya felt it too. She rose slowly, eyes fixed on the far window where shadows stretched and twisted with each flash of lightning. She raised one finger to her lips, not a plea for silence, but a command for attention. John met her gaze and nodded. He motioned for Clara to gather the children. She ushered them toward the back rooms, herding them with urgent calm. Sam hesitated, fists clenched. "I can help," he whispered. John shook his head. "Not tonight." Naya caught Sam's eye. She shook her head firmly, then placed her hand over his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart. Slowly, she pressed downward, grounding him. "Stay." Reluctantly, Sam stepped back. The knock came, then soft measured. Too polite to be friendly. John did not answer. The knock came again, followed by a voice raised just enough to be heard over the wind. "Hawkins, open up!" John recognized the voice, though he had hoped not to. "Caleb Knox." He stepped closer to the door, but did not open it. "Go home, Caleb." A laugh followed, sharp and humorless. "That's rich coming from you. I just want to talk." Naya moved to John's side, her presence steady. She studied the door, the frame, the shadows beneath it. "You shouldn't be hiding her," Caleb called. "Town's not pleased." John's jaw tightened. "She's under my roof." Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard. For a split second, John saw Caleb standing there, rain-soaked eyes, bright with something that looked too much like satisfaction. "Crowley sends his regards," Caleb added. "Says it doesn't have to get ugly." Naya's breath caught. She closed her eyes briefly, as if recognizing a path she had hoped to avoid. Without warning, a loud crack split the night, the sound of wood giving way. The barn door. John swore under his breath. Caleb's grin widened. "Guess your animals don't care much for locks." John opened the door just enough to step outside, rifle raised but not aimed. "You leave now." Caleb shrugged. "You always did think you could stand alone." Before John could react, movement flared at the edge of the yard. Another figure, then another, emerged briefly from the darkness, their forms half lost in the rain. Not town men. Different. Naya inhaled sharply. Her eyes locked onto a marking one of them, and wore a strip of cloth tied in a way she recognized instantly. Apache. Her body went rigid. John noticed at once. "You know them." She nodded once, slowly. "Not friends." The men lingered just beyond the reach of lantern light, watching, waiting. Their presence shifted the air, heavy with history and unfinished wounds. Caleb stepped back, instinctively unsettled. "What the hell is this?" Naya moved, then stepping past John, her posture calm but commanding. She raised her hands, palms outward, and spoke softly in her own language, her voice low and controlled. The men answered in short phrases, tense and clipped. Their eyes flicked to John, then back to Naya. Understanding passed between them, old, painful, and complicated. Naya turned to John. She placed a hand against her chest, then gestured toward the men, then made a slicing motion between them. "They are not here for you," her movement said. "They are here for me!" John felt his stomach drop. Thunder boomed again, closer now. One of the men spoke sharply to Naya. She answered with a single word that carried the weight of refusal. The men shifted, agitation rippling through them. One took a step forward. John raised his rifle not to threaten, but to draw a line. "This is my land," he said evenly. "You don't cross it." The man halted, eyes narrowing. Naya turned back to John, her expression urgent. She pointed to the house, to the children. They must be protected. John nodded. "Always." Another flash of lightning lit the scene. For a moment, everything froze. The men, the rain, the breath, held between heartbeats. Then the men retreated, melting back into the storm as quickly as they had appeared. Caleb stared after them, pale. "You don't know what you've brought here," he muttered. John took a step toward him. "I know exactly what kind of man you are." Caleb scoffed, backing away. "This isn't over." "No," John agreed. "It isn't." When the yard finally lay empty again, John and Naya stood in silence, rain soaking through their clothes. She trembled now, not with fear, but with something deeper. Memory. Loss. The echo of belonging torn away. John guided her back inside without a word. The children emerged cautiously, eyes wide. "They're gone," John said softly. Tommy ran to Naya, wrapping his arms around her legs. She knelt and held him close, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. Clara watched her, something shifting irrevocably in her gaze. Suspicion gave way to understanding. This woman had drawn danger away from them, not toward them. Later, when the storm finally broke and the world lay quiet again, John found Naya sitting alone at the table, staring at the carved token in her hands. He sat across from her. "They won't stop," he said gently. She looked up, eyes dark but resolute. She shook her head once. "Neither will I." Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying secrets across the land. Lines had been drawn that night, not in blood, but in choice, and the frontier, unforgiving and vast, had taken notice. The morning after the storm arrived with a brittle calm that felt earned rather than given. Clouds thinned into pale streaks, and the land steamed softly as the sun coaxed warmth from soaked earth. John Hawkins stood at the edge of the yard, surveying the damaged, muddy ruts a fence post loosened, the barn door scarred but standing. He had seen worse. What unsettled him was not what the storm had done, but what it had revealed. Naya slept later than usual. When she finally emerged, her steps were careful, her face drawn. She carried herself with resolve, but John noticed the slight hesitation in her gait, the way her hand hovered near her middle, as if guarding something fragile. He said nothing. Some truths asked to be invited. The children sensed the change before he did. Hattie watched Naya with new intensity, her brows knit with worry. Maggie followed her from room to room, offering small treasures, a ribbon, a smooth stone like talismans against harm. Sam kept his distance, quieter than usual, his bravado thinned by what he had seen the night before. It was Maeve Carter who spoke first. She arrived near midday with a basket of bread and a look that told John she had already heard enough to know trouble had passed close. She set the basket down and took Naya's hands without ceremony, her touch firm and familiar. "You look pale," Maeve said. Naya offered a small smile that did not reach her eyes. Maeve's gaze sharpened. She turned to John. "She eat this morning?" John hesitated. "A little." Maeve nodded once, then angled her head toward the shade of the cottonwood. "Walk with me." They moved slowly, the air filled with the soft buzz of insects and the distant creak of fence wire. Maeve spoke low, not unkindly. "I've seen women carry pain so long they forget where it began." Naya listened, her eyes on the ground. When Maeve touched her arm, she flinched, not away, but inward. John watched from a distance, careful not to intrude. He saw Maeve ask a question with her eyes. He saw Naya's answer in the way her shoulders stiffened, in the quick, shallow breath she took. Later, Maeve found John by the barn. "They called her barren," she said quietly. "That word does a lot of damage." John's jaw tightened. "Is it true?" Maeve shook her head. "I don't know, but I know lies are often dressed up as certainty." That afternoon, Hattie approached John with a seriousness that startled him. "She gets dizzy," the girl said. "Sometimes." "And she presses her hand like this." Hattie demonstrated palm curve protectively over her stomach. John's chest tightened. He had noticed it too. He had been afraid to name it. The town did not wait for answers. A writer brought word that evening. Dr. Everett Langford would be making his rounds the next day. The message felt less like a courtesy than a summons. John thanked the rider and watched him go, unease settling deep. When the doctor arrived, he came with his bag and his practiced calm eyes flicking around the ranch as though inventorying it. He greeted John cordially, then looked at Naya with a professional detachment that did not quite mask curiosity. "I won't force anything," Langford said, "but it might be wise to put rumors to rest." Naya stood very still. She looked to John not for permission, but for assurance. He nodded. "Only if you want to." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. The examination was brief and careful. Langford asked few questions. He listened more than he spoke. When he finished, his face had changed, not dramatically, but enough. Outside, he drew John aside. "Who told you she couldn't bear children?" Crowley, John said. Langford's lips pressed thin. "Crowley says a great many things. Some are convenient." John's heart hammered. "Is she?" Langford raised a hand. "I'll say this. There's no certainty she's barren. And there are signs, early ones, that suggest the opposite." The words rang in John's ears, equal parts hope and terror. "You're sure I'm careful?" Langford replied. "And I'm sure of this. Someone wanted her labeled. Removed." Quietly, John looked toward the house where Naya sat with Maggie teaching her a simple stitch. The child's laughter drifted out light and bright. "Will you tell the town?" John asked. Langford hesitated, not without her consent, and not without consequences. That night, the truth pressed close, heavy as the dark. Naya sat alone on the porch steps, the carved token turning in her fingers. John joined her, keeping a respectful distance. "She lied," he said gently. "They did." Naya closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had shifted fear, yes, but also relief. She nodded once, she pointed toward the horizon, then made a small bitter gesture, hands parting. "They said it to end me." Then she pressed her palm to her stomach and shook her head. "It was not true." John swallowed. They were wrong. Naya looked at him, searching. Slowly she placed the token in his hand. It felt warm from her skin. "I trust you." The sound of hooves carried faintly on the night air. John stiffened, but it passed someone riding the road beyond the fields. Even so, he felt the land listening. The next morning, the whispers reached them anyway. Mrs. Pruitt's carriage passed too slowly. A pair of men lingered near the fence, talking without looking. Sheriff Harlan rode by, tipping his hat with a politeness that felt rehearsed. By afternoon, the strain showed. Naya's face was pale again. She rose too quickly and swayed. Hattie was there in an instant, steadying her. "I'm fine," Naya said softly, the words careful but clear. John heard them and froze. It was the first full sentence he had heard her speak. The word fine rang false even to her. She sat breathing through the moment, one hand pressed protectively where life might be stirring, where a lie had tried to erase her. As dusk fell, John stood at the fence and looked toward town. He understood now why Crowley had smiled, why the men had come in the storm. The lie had been a tool, one meant to make her disposable. Disposable women did not demand answers. This one would. John turned back to the house where Naya sat surrounded by children who did not yet understand the stakes, only the bond. He felt the old instinct to retreat to shield by distance. But distance had never saved anyone. Whatever the town believed, whatever it decided to do next, the truth had found a foothold at his table. And lies once exposed to daylight had a way of burning those who relied on them. The truth once glimpsed refused to remain quiet. John Hawkins felt it in the way the ranch seemed suddenly exposed, every fence line a thin promise, every shadow a place where rumor could gather. He felt it in the children, too, in Sam's sharpened vigilance, in Clara's careful listening, when adults spoke in Hattie's steady presence at Naya's side, as though guarding something fragile and precious. And he felt it most of all in Naya herself. She moved more slowly now, conserving strength, her silences deeper, but no longer empty. When she spoke, it was with care, choosing words like stones placed across a river, few deliberate enough to cross. That morning, Hattie followed John into the barn. "She told me," Hattie said, her voice low but steady. John paused, hayfork in hand. "Told you what?" Hattie pressed her lips together. "That what they said about her? It wasn't true. That they used it to push her away." John set the fork down. "Did she say why?" Hattie shook her head. "She said some truths aren't safe until you know who's listening." John exhaled slowly. The girl's words carried more wisdom than he liked to admit. By midday, the listening began in earnest. A wagon slowed near the fence, its driver pretending to examine a loose wheel, while his eyes tracked the house. Two women passed by on horseback, their heads bent together, voices hushed. When John rode out to check the north pasture, he saw Sheriff Walter Harlan watching from the road, his expression unreadable. The knock came just before supper. John opened the door to find Sheriff Harlan standing alone, hat in hand. "Evening," he said. "May I come in?" John stepped aside. The sheriff's gaze traveled the room, noting Naya seated with Maggie. The children gathered close, the quiet tension that hummed beneath the surface. "There are concerns," Harlan said carefully. "People saying you're harboring someone who doesn't belong." John met his eyes. "She belongs where she's safe." Harlan sighed. "Crowley claims she was taken unlawfully, that she's property." Naya rose, then slow and steady. She looked at the sheriff and spoke, her accent thick, but her meaning clear. "I was sold," she said, "not stolen." Harlan blinked, caught off guard by her voice. "You speak English." "A little," she replied. "Enough." John felt something tighten in his chest, pride, fear, admiration, all tangled together. The sheriff cleared his throat. "There will be an inspection," he said, "just to satisfy the town." When John asked, "Soon," Harlan replied. "Tomorrow, if they have their way." After he left the house, felt smaller. "They're coming here," Sam said flatly. "Yes," John answered. "To take her?" Maggie asked, clutching Naya's hand. John knelt in front of her. "No one's taking anyone tonight." Naya squeezed Maggie's fingers gently, offering reassurance John wished he could fully give. Later, when the children were in bed, John found Naya on the porch, staring out into the dark. "They think if they look hard enough," she said softly, "they will find a reason." He nodded. "They always do." She hesitated, then spoke again, the words costing her. "In my tribe, they feared what they could not control. A woman who does not fit is easier to erase than to understand." John listened, silent and steady. "They said I could not give life." She continued. "So they said I was nothing." He felt anger rise hot and sharp. They were wrong. She met his gaze. "Yes." A pause. But wrong words still hurt. The next morning arrived with the sound of horses. 3 riders approached the ranch. Sheriff Harlan, Mrs. Lillian Pruitt seated stiffly behind him in her carriage, and Dr. Langford riding slightly apart, his face tight with unease. Clara ushered the younger children inside, her movements calm, but her eyes bright with worry. Sam lingered near the doorway, jaw set. "This is unnecessary," John said as he stepped forward. "Necessary to keep peace." Mrs. Pruitt replied coolly, "The town deserves reassurance." Reassurance, John thought, was a softer word for control. They moved through the house with polite intrusion, opening doors, asking questions that were statements in disguise. Naya answered when she could, her voice even. When she could not, she remained silent, not submissive, but guarded. In the back room, Mrs. Pruitt paused, her gaze narrowing. "You've made yourself quite comfortable," she said to Naya. Naya looked at her calmly. "I work. I care for children." Mrs. Pruitt sniffed. "That doesn't make you fit." Dr. Langford stepped forward then. "Enough," he said quietly. "This has gone far enough." Mrs. Pruitt turned on him. "You have information, doctor. The town expects transparency." Langford hesitated, the weight of consequence visible on his face. He looked at Naya. She met his gaze and nodded once. "It's not true," he said. "What was said about her? There is no proof she is barren. Quite the opposite." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Mrs. Pruitt's face hardened. "Are you certain I am careful with my words?" Langford replied. "Unlike others." The sheriff shifted uneasily. "This changes things." "It changes nothing," Mrs. Pruitt snapped. "If anything, it makes her more dangerous." Naya inhaled sharply. John stepped between her and Mrs. Pruitt without thinking. "She's not dangerous," he said. "She's human." The inspection ended abruptly after that. No apologies were offered, only looks calculating, resentful, unsettled. When they were gone, Clara leaned against the wall, exhaling shakily. "They won't stop." John nodded. "No." That night, a note was left at the fence line, pinned to a post with a small knife. John found it at dawn. "Some truths are paid for in blood. Send her back before the town decides for you." Naya stood beside him as he read it. She did not flinch. She did not look afraid. Instead, she reached for his hand and placed it over her heart, then over her own. "We stand together." John closed his fingers around hers, feeling the steady beat beneath her palm. The secret was no longer hers alone, and the town, having heard it breathe, would soon decide how much it was willing to destroy to silence it. The day the town came to the Hawkins ranch arrived without ceremony, carried on the low thud of hooves and the rattle of a carriage wheel. John heard them before he saw them, measured, deliberate, like a decision already made. He stepped onto the porch as Sheriff Walter Harlan dismounted, flanked by 2 deputies whose faces were set with borrowed resolve. Mrs. Lillian Pruitt followed in her carriage spine, straight lips pressed thin. Dr. Everett Langford rode behind them, his expression tight, as though he were walking into a room where words could wound. Naya stood just inside the doorway, the children clustered behind her. Clara's hand rested on Sam's arm. Hattie's fingers were laced through Maggie's. Tommy pressed his face into Naya's skirt. John felt a flare of anger at how quickly the town's concern had transformed into a spectacle. "This won't take long," Harlan said, already signaling the deputies forward. "Just a look around." A look for what John asked. "Whatever answers the town needs," Mrs. Pruitt replied before the sheriff could speak. John stepped aside. "You'll find nothing but a family." They moved through the house with methodical politeness, opening cupboards, lifting lids, peering beneath beds. The deputies asked questions that were not questions at all. Where did she sleep? What did she eat? Who had visited Naya answered when she could. When she could not, she held their gaze in calm refusal. John noticed how that unsettled them more than anger would have. In the back room, a deputy paused, frowning. "What's this?" He reached beneath a crate and drew out a small pouch, leather-worn, unfamiliar. John's heart sank. He had never seen it before. Mrs. Pruitt leaned forward, interest sharpening her voice. "Well now, that wasn't here before, was it?" Naya stiffened. She shook her head slowly. "No." The deputy loosened the drawstring and spilled the contents into his palm. Dried herbs, a bit of twine, a sliver of bone. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous. But it was enough. Superstition, Mrs. Pruitt said with thin satisfaction. Witchcraft, perhaps. Dr. Langford bristled. "That's absurd." Mrs. Pruitt turned on him. "So is harboring an Apache woman under false pretenses." John felt something snap. "That pouch isn't hers," he said. "Someone planted it." Harlan hesitated, glancing between the adults, the children, the pouch. The room held its breath. "Search the barn," Mrs. Pruitt pressed. "Thoroughly." They did. John followed, jaw tight, as the deputies spread out among the stalls and hay bales. Rain from days before still clung to the earth, and footprints marred the mud, old and new overlapping. One deputy crouched, then straightened with a shout. "Sheriff?" He held up a small tin of powder, the label half scraped away. Mrs. Pruitt's eyes gleamed. "Poison," she said promptly. "It's lye," John said. "For soap." "Or for harm," she countered. The deputies exchanged looks. Harlan's face darkened, not with certainty, but with the relief of finding something, anything. "I'm sorry, John," Harlan said, voice heavy. "I need to take you in. Until this is sorted." The children cried out at once. "No." Maggie clutched John's leg. Papa Tommy sobbed. John knelt, quickly pulling them close. "It's all right," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "I'll be back." Naya stepped forward, then her eyes wide, not with fear for herself, but for him. She shook her head, hands lifting as if to stop the world from moving. "It's not him," she said, the words urgent. "It's not Harlan," raised a hand. "I know," he said quietly, "but the town won't hear it today." John stood. He looked at Naya, then at Clara. "You keep them together," he said to his daughter. "All of you. Listen to Naya." Clara swallowed hard and nodded. As the deputies led John away, Mrs. Pruitt watched with something like triumph, though she masked it behind a look of solemn concern. Langford would not meet John's eyes. The house felt hollow after they were gone. Naya stood in the doorway long after the dust settled her chest tight, her breath shallow. The children hovered near her, frightened and confused. "They took him," Joey whispered. Naya knelt, gathering them close. She pressed her hand to her heart, then to each of theirs in turn. "We are still here." That afternoon passed in a blur of quiet resilience. Naya cooked with what remained rationing without complaint. She mended a torn sleeve, calmed Tommy's trembling, sat with Sam when his anger threatened to spill over. At dusk, Clara found her at the table, head bowed, hands braced against the wood. "What do we do?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. Naya looked up, eyes steady, despite the weight pressing down on her. She touched the carved token at her neck, then pointed to the door, to the fence, to the horizon. "We prepare." She led Clara to the back room and showed her where supplies were kept, how to signal Maeve Carter if needed, how to keep the lamps low after dark. Her instructions were few but precise. Clara listened, absorbing each word like a lifeline. Night fell heavy and silent. Naya sat by the window, watching the road that led to town. In her lap lay the token worn smooth by years of fear and hope. She pressed it to her lips once, then tucked it away and stood. Outside, the wind lifted, carrying the distant murmur of voices from far off. Somewhere a town congratulated itself on order restored. But in the quiet house with children breathing softly behind her, Naya straightened her shoulders and set her jaw. They had taken the man who had given her shelter. Now the lie would demand its price. The first night without John Hawkins felt like a cruel experiment, as if the world wanted to see how quickly a home could collapse when the man at its center was removed. Clara tried not to show fear. She moved through the house with her chin lifted, repeating her father's last words like a prayer. Keep them together. Listen to Naya. But every time the wind brushed the windows, her shoulders tensed. Every creak of the porch sounded like a footstep that did not belong. Naya did not cry. She did not pace or wring her hands. She simply worked quietly, steadily, as though motion itself could hold chaos at bay. She banked the fire, checked the latches twice, and herded the children into the back rooms with a calm authority that surprised even Clara. Sam hovered near the front door, fists clenched, anger simmering beneath his skin. "We should go get him," he muttered. "We should." Naya crossed the room and stopped in front of him. She raised her hand, palm open. Not a slap. A stop. Sam's breath came hard. "They can't just take him." Naya met his eyes. Slowly, she placed her hand on his chest again, right over his pounding heart, and pressed downward until his shoulders dropped a fraction. "Not like this," her gaze said. "Not with fury. Not with mistakes." She pointed to the children's rooms, then to him. "They need you steady." Sam's jaw worked, fighting tears he refused to show. Finally, he nodded once and stepped back. Clara watched the exchange, something inside her shifting. She had spent years believing strength meant doing everything alone. Now she saw a different kind of strength, quiet, relentless, protective. They ate in strained silence. Tommy barely touched his food. Maggie clutched her spoon like it was the only thing anchoring her to the table. Joey fidgeted, restless eyes darting to the dark windows. "Papa's coming back tomorrow," Hattie said softly, more hope than certainty. Clara didn't answer. Naya reached across the table and placed a small piece of bread in Tommy's hand, guiding his fingers to close around it. She nodded gently. "Eat. Live. Wait." Later, once the younger ones were in bed, Clara pulled Naya aside into the kitchen. "We can't stay here if they come again," Clara whispered. Naya's eyes sharpened. She nodded. Clara swallowed. "If it gets worse, we could go to Maeve." Naya's gaze softened at the mention of the old widow. She reached into a small tin by the hearth and drew out a strip of cloth, white folded neatly. She handed it to Clara, then pointed toward Maeve's direction and made a waving motion. A signal Clara realized, a promise already arranged. Clara's throat tightened. "You planned this." Naya's expression did not change. She simply placed her hand over her heart. "I protect what I can." The night deepened. Somewhere past midnight, the dogs began to bark low, uneasy. Naya sat up instantly, her body moving before her mind could fully wake. She crossed to the window, peering out through a narrow crack in the curtain. Lantern light flickered near the fence. Two shapes moved in the dark. Clara's stomach dropped. She shook Hattie awake, then Sam. Sam rose at once, face hardening. Joey popped up too, eyes wide, suddenly alert. Naya gestured sharply 2 fingers, then pointed to the back rooms. "Move." Clara gathered the younger ones, coaxing Maggie and Tommy from their beds, whispering soft reassurances she did not fully believe. Hattie helped her hand steady, despite the fear in her eyes. Sam reached for the rifle John kept near the door. Naya caught his wrist. She shook her head violently. Sam glared. "They're here. I'm not letting them." Naya pointed to the rifle, then to the floor, then made the same slicing motion she had made before. "This will end in death, and not the right kind." Sam's breath hitched. For a heartbeat, he looked like a boy again, frightened, desperate. Then he lowered the rifle slowly, as if the weight of it had become too much. The knock came hard and impatient. Clara froze. Her mouth went dry. Naya stepped forward, her posture calm but ready. She did not open the door. She called through it instead, her English rough but clear. "Go," she said. "Not welcome." A laugh answered, smooth, familiar. "Now that's ungrateful," Silas Crowley's voice purred. "After all I did for you." Clara's blood turned cold. Naya's hand tightened around the edge of the table. Her eyes flashed with something fierce. Crowley spoke again, louder. "Open the door, girl. Sheriff took Hawkins. That ranch is vulnerable now." And I don't like loose ends. Clara's heart hammered. What does he want? Naya didn't answer with words. She made a motion, hands bound, then a gesture outward sold away. Clara understood. He wants to take you. Naya nodded once. Crowley's voice sharpened. I can do this easy or hard, but I will do it. Sam took a step forward, rage rising again. Leave her alone. Crowley laughed. Ah, the boy. You think you're a man now. You'll get yourself killed trying. Naya turned and looked at Sam, her gaze steady, commanding. Then she pointed to the children, then to herself, then to the door. I will handle this. You keep them safe. Clara shook her head fiercely. No, we're not giving you up. Naya's expression softened, almost tender. She touched Clara's cheek briefly, then pointed to the back rooms. If I go, you live. Clara's eyes filled. That's not fair. Naya pressed her hand over Clara's heart. Life is not fair, but we choose what we do with it. Crowley began rattling the door handle, testing the lock. The sound made Tommy whimper from the back room. Clara's jaw clenched. We need help. Naya nodded sharply. She gestured toward the cloth strip again, Maeve. Hattie, understanding at once, slipped toward the back door like a shadow. Naya caught her gaze and nodded. Hattie darted out into the night, moving low, disappearing into darkness and rain-wet grass. Crowley slammed his shoulder into the door once. The frame shook. Last chance, he called. Open it. Naya stepped to the side, signaling Clara to keep everyone back. Then she took a slow breath and did something that surprised them all. She spoke, not loudly, not panicked, but clear enough to pierce the fear. You lied, she said through the door. You sold lie. There was a pause. Then Crowley's voice turned colder. Careful, girl. You're forgetting your place. Naya's eyes burned. My place is here. Another slam against the door, harder this time. The wood groaned. Clara grabbed Joey's hand. Sam clenched his fists. Maggie pressed her face into Clara's skirt. Tommy began to cry silently. And Naya stood in front of the door like a wall, small, silent, unyielding. If Crowley broke through, he would not find a helpless woman waiting. He would find a mother defending 6 children who were not hers by blood, but had become hers by choice. Silas Crowley did not force the door again. Instead, he waited. The pressure of his presence lingered on the porch like a hand pressed against the throat of the house, patient and cruel. Rain began again in a thin, isolating drizzle, turning the lantern light into a trembling halo. Inside, no one breathed easily. Naya stood with her back to the door, listening not to Crowley's voice but to the rhythm beneath it. Men like him always believed time belonged to them. If he waited long enough, fear would do his work. He spoke at last, his tone altered, coaxing. You don't want the children hurt. I know you don't. And I don't want trouble either. Clara felt her knees weaken. Sam's hands shook at his sides. Maggie whimpered softly. Naya closed her eyes for a brief moment. Then she turned and moved to the table, taking the carved token from the small pouch at her neck. She set it down carefully as though marking a decision. She faced Clara and spoke low, each word deliberate. I go, she said. He stop. Clara's breath caught. No, he won't. Men like him don't keep promises. Naya shook her head. She gestured Crowley, then the road, then the jail. He wants leverage. He wants silence. She placed her hand over her belly, then over her heart. I carry something he fears. Sam's eyes widened. You mean Naya lifted a finger? Not here. The door handle rattled softly. Crowley had heard the shift in the house, the tremor of resolve meeting dread. Think it through, he called. Hawkins sits in a cell because of you. You walk out with me. I make it right. Naya's jaw tightened. She moved toward the door, then stopped. She turned back to the children kneeling so they could all see her face. She touched each of them lightly, one by one. Tommy's hair, Maggie's hand, Joey's shoulder, Hattie's arm, Sam's wrist, Clara's cheek. Her eyes held theirs with an intensity that made Clara's chest ache. Remember me, the gesture said. Remember how to stand. Clara grabbed her wrist. You're not leaving. Naya pressed her forehead gently to Clara's. You are strong, she said. You keep them strong. Tears spilled down Clara's face despite her effort to stop them. Papa told us to listen to you. Naya nodded. Now you listen to me. A whistle sounded from the road, one short note. Crowley's signal. Naya rose and reached for the back door latch. Sam lunged forward. I won't let you. Naya caught his gaze and shook her head, once firm, unyielding. She placed her hand on his chest and held it there until his breath slowed. Lev, her eyes said, protect. The back door opened onto the rain-slick dark. Naya stepped out, pulling her shawl tight, and closed it softly behind her. Crowley smiled when he saw her emerge alone. "Smart girl." She did not answer. She walked toward him with measured steps, chin lifted, eyes steady. The men with him, two shadows flanking his horse, shifted, surprised by her composure. "Get on," Crowley said, nodding to the horse. She stopped short. She pointed toward the house, then made a firm gesture of finality. "No harm." Crowley laughed. "Of course, I keep my word." She met his gaze, unblinking. Slowly, she drew a line in the wet dirt with the toe of her boot and shook her head. "You swear." Crowley's smile faltered just a touch. Then he raised a hand. "On my business." Naya knew what that was worth, but it was the only currency offered. Inside the house, Clara pressed her ear to the wall, listening to the murmur of voices swallowed by rain. Hattie returned breathless through the back mud on her skirt. "I found Maeve," she whispered. "She's sending help." Clara nodded, wiping her face. "Then we buy time." Outside, Crowley lifted Naya onto the horse with rough efficiency. She winced, but did not cry out. As they rode away from the house, she looked back once, only once, fixing the shape of the porch, the windows, the life she was leaving behind in her memory. They had not gone far when a rider approached from the opposite direction. Dr. Everett Langford reined in sharply, surprise flickering across his face. "Crowley," he said. "What is this?" Crowley's smile returned, oily and assured. "Business concluded." Langford's eyes went to Naya. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she guarded her center, the quiet defiance in her gaze. His jaw tightened. "She's not property," he said. Crowley shrugged. "She is silence, and silence is valuable." Langford hesitated, then made a decision that would haunt him if he did not. "You're wrong," he said louder now. "And if you take her, you risk more than rumor." Crowley leaned close. "Careful, doctor. You've already said too much." Before Langford could respond, voices rose behind them. Maeve Carter's sharp and unmistakable, joined by others. Lanterns bobbed in the dark as a small group approached from the ranch road. Crowley cursed under his breath. "Mount up," he snapped. Naya felt the horse surge forward. Rain blurred her vision. She pressed one hand over her belly, the other clutching the saddle strap, holding on as the road stretched ahead. Behind them, Maeve's voice carried. "Stop! You have no right!" Crowley laughed, spurring the horse harder. "Rights belong to those who keep them." The road narrowed near the ravine, mud slick and treacherous. Crowley slowed, glancing back. He did not see Naya shift her weight until it was too late. She slipped. Not a fall, an escape. She rolled into the ditch, the world spinning, pain flaring sharp and hot. The horse thundered past. Crowley shouted, hauling the reins too late. Naya lay still, rain soaking her clothes, breath ragged. Lantern light spilled over her as Maeve and Langford reached her side. "Easy, Maeve," said hands, gentle but firm. "We've got you." Naya opened her eyes. She looked past them toward the direction of the ranch. Her lips moved. "They must be safe," she whispered. Maeve squeezed her hand. "They are. Because of you." Langford knelt, checking her quickly. "We need to get her somewhere safe," he said. "Now." In the distance, a shout echoed, Crowley calling men back to him. Time pressed close again. Maeve straightened eyes, fierce. "Then we make our stand." As they lifted Naya carefully, she closed her eyes, fighting the darkness tugging at her edges. She had made the bargain knowing it might break her, but she had chosen. And sometimes that was the beginning of the end for men who believed they owned the world. By the time dawn began to thin the night, the road between the ravine and the Hawkins ranch had become a corridor of breathless decisions. Maeve Carter led them the long way, avoiding the main track where Crowley's men might pass again. Dr. Everett Langford rode close behind, steadying Naya. Whenever the path jolted her, Naya's pain came in waves, sharp, when she moved, dull, when she lay still. But she held herself with quiet discipline, breathing through it, as she had learned to do long ago. They reached the ranch just as the sky softened to gray. Clara saw them first. She had not slept. She stood at the window, eyes burning from tears she refused to shed when she saw the lantern bob through the morning mist. She ran to the door, flinging it open before Sam could stop her. "Naya," she cried. Maeve raised a hand. "Quiet now." They carried Naya inside and laid her gently on the narrow bed in the back room. Hattie fetched water. Maggie hovered near the door, clutching the scrap of cloth Naya had given her. Joey paced, unable to sit still. Tommy stood frozen, eyes wide and shining. Dr. Langford worked quickly, murmuring reassurance as he checked Naya's breathing and pulse. "She's shaken," he said. "Bruised, But she's strong. Naya's eyes fluttered open. She looked around, taking in the faces, 6 children pale with fear and relief. She tried to sit up. Clara pressed her gently back. Don't. Naya's lips curved in the faintest smile. She lifted a hand and pointed to each of them in turn, counting without numbers, as if making sure they were all still there. Sam swallowed hard. They didn't hurt us, he said. We didn't let them. Naya closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. Good. The calm lasted less than an hour. Hooves sounded on the road. Not 1 or 2, but many. Voices carried. The scrape of metal. Clara's heart lurched. They're back. Maeve moved to the window and swore softly. Crowley brought friends. Dr. Langford's face tightened. Then it's time. He stepped outside as the men gathered near the fence, townsmen, a deputy or 2, and Silas Crowley at the center, his coat immaculate, his expression smug. Morning, Crowley called. I'm here to collect what's mine. Langford did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You're done, Crowley. Crowley laughed. You don't get to decide that. I do today, Langford replied, because today I speak plainly. The murmuring began curious, uneasy. Sheriff Walter Harlan arrived, last reins tight eyes scanning the scene. What's going on? He demanded. Langford turned to him. What should have happened days ago? Crowley's smile flickered. Careful, doctor. Langford ignored him. The claim that Naya is barren is false. It always was. There was no diagnosis, only rumor dressed as certainty. A ripple of reaction passed through the men. A few exchanged looks. One spat into the dirt, uneasy. Crowley scoffed. You expect us to take your word, I expect you to take evidence, Langford said. And truth. He reached into his bag and withdrew papers, notes, dates, careful observations. I examined her. I did not speak sooner because I feared men like you would twist it, but I won't stay silent now. Crowley stepped forward. You're lying. At that moment, the front door opened. Clara walked out first. She did not carry a gun. She did not shout. She stood on the porch with her shoulders squared 6 years older than she had been the day before. Behind her came Sam, then Hattie, Joey, Maggie, and Tommy. They lined up shoulder to shoulder, hands linked. Maeve stood just behind them, a quiet sentinel. Crowley stared. Get back inside. Clara shook her head. No. The word landed like a stone. She saved us, Clara said, her voice trembling but strong. When you came. When others looked away. She stood in front of us. Sam stepped forward. She told me not to use a gun, even when I wanted to, even when I was scared. Hattie added, she stayed when she could have run. Maggie lifted the scrap of cloth. She gave me this, she said, so I wouldn't be afraid. Tommy's small voice followed, barely audible. She sings when it storms. The men shifted again, discomfort spreading. This was not the story they had been prepared to hear. Sheriff Harlan cleared his throat. Crowley, he said slowly, is there anything you'd like to add? Crowley's eyes hardened. Children are easily swayed. Naya appeared, then supported by Maeve. She stood in the doorway, pale but unbowed. The sight of her drew a hush. She spoke carefully, each word chosen and placed. I was sold, she said. Not because I was barren, because I would not agree to a lie. Crowley's face flushed. You think you can turn a town with sob stories? Naya's gaze did not leave his. I think truth turns itself. She reached into the pocket of her shawl and withdrew the carved token, the one she had guarded with her life. She held it up so all could see. This, she said, was given to me to keep silent, to go away. Langford stepped beside her. Crowley used fear and money. Sheriff Harlan's jaw tightened. He looked at Crowley, then at the papers in Langford's hand, then at the children standing together like a wall. That's enough, the sheriff said. Crowley laughed, once sharp and ugly. You're making a mistake. Harlan raised a hand. No, we made one already. He nodded to the deputies. Detain him. Crowley's smile vanished. You'll regret this. As they took him, a sound rose, not cheers, but something quieter. Exhales. The release of a lie, losing its grip. The men dispersed slowly, uncertain, chastened. Some would not change. Others would. It was enough for now. Inside, Naya sagged, the effort spent. Clara caught her, holding her upright. You're staying, Clara said fiercely. Your family. Naya's eyes filled. She touched Clara's cheek, then pressed her forehead gently to the girl's. Chosen, the gesture said. That afternoon, the children gathered around Naya's bed. Sam apologized without words, just a bowed head and a promise kept. Hattie read softly. Joey fixed a broken chair leg. Maggie hummed along when Naya sang. Tommy slept curled against her side. As the sun set, a rider arrived at last. Known hooves, a familiar posture. John Hawkins dismounted in the yard, eyes searching. He found them at the window together. Clara ran first. John followed her inside, breath catching when he saw Naya. "You're here," he said, the words breaking. Naya smiled. "You came back." He took her hand, careful, reverent. Around them, 6 children stood tall. They had chosen, and in choosing they had changed everything. John Hawkins did not sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with a lamp turned low, listening to the ranch breathe around him. The tick of cooling wood, the soft sigh of wind through grass, the distant nickering of horses settling. Every sound felt newly precious, earned at a cost he was still tallying in his bones. Across the room, Naya rested on the narrow bed, Maeve's quilt pulled to her chin. Her face was pale, but her breathing was even. When John rose to check on her, she opened her eyes at once, as if she had been waiting for him. "You should sleep," she said softly. "So should you," he replied, smiling despite the ache in his chest. She studied him for a long moment, then reached out and took his hand. The contact was steady grounding. "The town will not be quiet tomorrow," she said. "No." John agreed. It never is when a lie is pulled into daylight. By morning, the town came to them. Not as a mob, but as a procession, neighbors, traders, the uncertain, and the curious. Sheriff Harlan rode in early, dismounting with the look of a man who had chosen a path and now had to walk it. Reverend Amos Whitaker followed on foot, hat in hand, eyes troubled. Mrs. Lillian Pruitt arrived last, her carriage stopping just short of the gate, as if the land itself repelled her. John stood at the fence with Clara at his side, Sam a step behind. The younger children watched from the porch, Hattie's arm around Maggie, Tommy clutching Joey's shirt. Harlan spoke first. "There's been talk. And questions." He glanced at Naya, who stood beside John, wrapped in a shawl. "Some folks want reassurance." Mrs. Pruitt cleared her throat. "What we want is order." John's jaw tightened. Order built on lies isn't order. It's fear. Reverend Whitaker shifted uncomfortably. "We must consider the peace of the community." Naya met his gaze. "Peace is not silence," she said. "It is truth with courage." The words hung there, simple and unyielding. Mrs. Pruitt stepped forward. "You would have us believe one woman over a town," Clara spoke before John could stop her. "We're not asking you to believe her. We're asking you to stop pretending you don't believe yourselves." A murmur rippled through the group. Some faces softened, others hardened. Dr. Langford arrived, then papers in hand. "I've given my statement to the sheriff," he said, "and I'll give it to anyone who asks. What was done to her was wrong." Mrs. Pruitt's lips thinned. "You think this ends with Crowley?" No, Langford replied evenly. "I think it begins without him." Harlan exhaled. "Crowley's being held. There will be charges." "And the rest of us," Mrs. Pruitt demanded. "Do we bear none?" Naya took a step forward, surprising everyone. "I did not come here to punish," she said. "I came to live." John felt her hand find his again. He squeezed it, steadying both of them. The gathering thinned as the morning wore on. Some left with apologies they did not quite know how to offer. Others left with resentment tucked tight behind their ribs. The frontier did not change all at once. It shifted inch by inch under the weight of what it could no longer deny. By afternoon, the ranch felt quieter than it had in days. John set to work mending what the storm and the search had broken. Sam joined him without being asked, handing nails, holding boards. When John glanced at him, Sam nodded. No words needed. Clara organized the younger ones, turning fear into tasks. Water carried bread. Needed beds aired. Hattie sat with Naya, reading aloud, her voice steady and low. Maggie drew pictures in the dust with the stick horses, a house, a woman standing tall. Tommy slept at Naya's side, his small hand curled around her finger. Near dusk, a rider appeared at the far edge of the field. John stiffened until he recognized the posture. The man dismounted slowly, hat held against his chest. He did not cross the fence line. "I've come to say I was wrong," the man said. "I won't speak for others. Only myself." John nodded once. "That's a start." When the rider left, Naya watched the horizon with a thoughtful frown. "Change makes noise," she said. "Then it makes quiet. But quiet can hide things." John followed her gaze. "What do you see?" She hesitated, then touched the carved token at her neck. Crowley did not act alone. The words settled like a stone dropped into still water. John felt the ripples move outward, touching every fence post, every road leading away from the ranch. That night, as stars pricked the sky, John and Naya stood on the porch. The children's laughter drifted from inside, soft, unforced. It felt like a miracle and a warning all at once. Whatever comes, John said, we face it together. Naya nodded. Together. From the darkness beyond the fields, a coyote cried, long searching, unresolved. Naya listened, her expression unreadable. There are letters, she said quietly. Promises made before I came here. Debts men do not like to remember. John's hand tightened on the railing. Then we'll remember for them. She looked at him, a question in her eyes, not of fear, but of trust. He answered by taking her hand and pressing it to his heart. The land lay open before them, vast and watchful. The storm of honor had passed, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean, but clouds gathered far off, slow and patient. The frontier had been challenged. It would answer in its own time. The first morning after the town dispersed arrived quietly, as if the land itself were reluctant to disturb what had been hard won. Sunlight crept across the Hawkins ranch in thin bands of gold, warming the porch boards glinting off fence wire still damp with dew. For the first time in many days, no riders waited at the gate. No voices carried on the wind. Inside the house, life resumed in careful pieces. John Hawkins stood at the stove stirring a pot of oats, while Maggie sat on the counter, swinging her legs, offering commentary on everything from the weather to how many eggs they had left. Joey set the table crookedly. Hattie folded blankets with practiced calm. Sam hauled water from the pump, shoulders squared, jaw set, not with anger now but with purpose. And Naya sat at the table, a quilt wrapped around her, watching, not as a guest, not as a burden, as someone who belonged. When John set a bowl in front of her, she looked up at him with a faint smile. "Smells good," she said, her English still careful but growing steadier by the day. He smiled back. "Clara's idea says we should eat like a family again." Naya's gaze flicked to Clara, who pretended not to notice, busy slicing bread, but her ears reddened slightly. After breakfast, the work of the day unfolded naturally. John and Sam repaired the last of the storm damage. Joey followed them, hammer in hand, desperate to be useful. Maggie sat near Naya, practicing her stitches with fierce concentration. Tommy refused to leave Naya's side. He dragged his blanket after him, curled up at her feet, and fell asleep to the rhythm of her breathing. No one tried to move him. By midday, Maeve Carter arrived with news and a basket of apples. "They'll take Crowley east," she said. "Trial maybe, maybe not. But he won't be darkening your door again." John nodded. "Thank you." Maeve studied Naya, her sharp eyes softening. "And you?" Naya met her gaze evenly. "I stay." Maeve smiled, a small, satisfied curve of her lips. "Good." In the afternoon, Sheriff Harlan rode by alone. He did not dismount. "I wanted you to hear it from me," he said. "There'll be no more inspections. No claims. As far as the law is concerned, she's free." John felt a breath leave him that he hadn't known he was holding. Harlan hesitated, then added, "I can't undo what I allowed, but I won't allow it again." Naya inclined her head, accepting the words for what they were, not redemption, but effort. As the sheriff rode away, the ranch settled deeper into itself. The day lengthened, shadows stretching across the fields. John found Naya standing at the edge of the pasture, watching the horses graze. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I was thinking." "That can be dangerous," he said lightly. She smiled, then grew serious. "I have never stayed anywhere long," she said, "always waiting to be told to leave." "You're not waiting here," John replied. "You're staying." She looked at him, searching his face. "And if trouble comes again," he did not hesitate, "then it comes to all of us." She considered that, then reached out and took his hand. The gesture was simple. The meaning was not. That evening, Clara gathered everyone at the table without announcement. She stood shoulders back and cleared her throat. "I want to say something," she said. The younger ones quieted instantly. Clara looked at Naya. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. "You didn't come here to replace our mother. You didn't try to take anything that wasn't yours." Naya's eyes filled, though she said nothing. "You stayed when it was hard," Clara continued. "You protected us. You taught us how to be brave without hurting people." Sam nodded. "I was wrong about you," he said simply. Maggie slid off her chair and hugged Naya's waist. "You're ours," she declared. Tommy stirred, then added sleepily, "Mama Naya." The room went still. Naya froze. Her breath caught. Slowly she knelt and wrapped her arms around the child, her shoulders trembling not with fear, but with something like release. John watched his chest tight. He did not correct the word. He did not rush to define it. Some names chose themselves. That night, as the children slept, John and Naya sat on the porch, beneath a sky scattered with stars. Crickets sang. The land breathed. There may be letters, Naya said quietly. From people who think they still have claim. John nodded. We'll answer them. And if the answer is no, she asked. Then no, he said, is a complete sentence. She laughed softly at that, a sound rare enough to feel like a gift. They sat in silence, comfortable and shared. At last Naya spoke again. In my tribe home was where you were seen. John turned to her. Then you're home. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not move. He let the moment settle, knowing better than to rush something that had grown so carefully. Beyond the ranch, the frontier stretched on harsh, beautiful, unforgiving. It would test them again someday. Of that, John had no doubt. But for now, there was light in the windows, laughter in the rooms, and a woman once sold as nothing sat at the heart of a family that had chosen her freely, fiercely, forever. Arfar. The land watched, and for once it did not demand a price. This story reminds us that a person's worth is never defined by the labels placed upon them by fear, tradition, or cruelty. Naya was called infertile, unwanted, and disposable, but none of those words were true. What truly mattered was not what others said about her, but what she chose to become when faced with injustice. In protecting children who were not born of her body, she revealed the deepest truth of all motherhood is not only about giving life, but about giving courage, safety, and love. John Hawkins and his children learned another quiet lesson, the kind that comes only through pain. Family is not always formed by blood or history. Sometimes it is formed by choice, by standing together when it would be easier to turn away. Healing does not arrive loudly. It arrives in small acts of trust, in shared silence, and in the bravery to believe that goodness can still grow in harsh ground. CTA. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read how it made you feel. And if you enjoy emotional, meaningful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next journey.